You're changing, but it doesn't feel good yet. You thought growth was supposed to feel like progress, like something opening up, like clarity finally arriving, like relief. Instead, it feels like confusion, like something you used to trust just stopped making sense, like you're doing all the right things, but nothing feels settled. You're not broken. You're not going backward, but nobody told you it would feel like this. And quietly, in the back of your mind, you've been asking yourself, is this still growth, or am I just falling apart? And you're not alone in asking that. Buddhism has understood this pattern for a very long time. What it says about growth might completely change how you see what's happening right now. That's what we're going to look at together today. The Buddha said, nothing is permanent. And he didn't mean that as a warning. He meant it as a map. You've been taught to picture growth as an upward line. More confidence, more clarity, more ease. So when growth actually starts, and it feels like the opposite, you don't recognize it. Here's the thing about real change. It rarely announces itself as growth. It announces itself as discomfort. A relationship that used to feel comfortable starts feeling limiting. A habit you've had for years starts to feel wrong. A version of yourself that worked for a long time starts to feel too small. That's not falling apart. That's the old structure loosening. And loosening isn't collapse, even if it feels like it from the inside. Picture a snake shedding its skin. From the outside, it looks like something going wrong. The old layer peeling, cracking, coming apart. But the snake isn't dying. It's growing. The old skin just can't stretch any further. That's the image worth holding on to right now. What's coming apart isn't you. It's what you've outgrown. Buddhism has a word for this friction. Dukkha, not suffering in the dramatic sense, but a persistent friction between who you are and who you're becoming. The word dukkha literally means a wheel that doesn't fit its axle, something that can't quite roll smoothly. That's exactly what growth feels like from the inside. Something that used to fit no longer does. And instead of asking, why doesn't this fit anymore? Most people ask, what's wrong with me? But nothing is wrong with you. The fit changed because you changed. Think about this. A shoe that was perfect for you 5 years ago might pinch today. Not because the shoe is broken. Not because your foot is broken, but because you've grown. The friction you feel is not failure. It's a signal that you're no longer the person this old version was designed for. Buddhism calls this Anatta, the teaching of non-self, the idea that what you call me is not a fixed thing. It's a process, a continuous unfolding, and that unfolding is rarely smooth. When the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, it wasn't peaceful at first. The night before his awakening, he faced every fear, every doubt, every old pattern fighting to stay alive. The dissolution always comes before the clarity, not after. And if you're in the dissolving phase right now, that's not a sign that something went wrong. That's a sign that something real is beginning. You just have to stay in it long enough to see what's forming. When you're in the middle of change, your mind searches for solid ground. It wants a clear answer, a definitive direction, something it can hold on to. And when it can't find one, it starts to see that confusion as a threat. You think, I should know what I'm doing by now. I should have this figured out. Why does this still feel so uncertain? Here's something important. That uncertainty you're feeling, it's not a failure of understanding. It's a sign that your understanding is expanding beyond what it used to contain. The Zen tradition has a name for this state. Don't know mind, not ignorant, not confusion without purpose, but a mind that has become honest enough to say, I don't fully know yet, and I don't need to. There's a quiet courage in that. Most people spend enormous energy pretending they know, pretending the direction is clear, pretending the next step is obvious. And all of that pretending costs something. It costs you the honest engagement with what's actually happening. A mind that clings to what it already knows can't take in anything new. The confusion you're feeling right now might be your mind making room for something it hasn't held before. Think about it this way. If you've always lived in one small room, you know exactly where everything is. You move through it without thinking. But when the walls come down and the space gets bigger, suddenly you don't know where you are. The familiar landmarks are gone. Your body doesn't have a map for this yet. That's not getting lost. That's the room getting larger. This is what growth does. It expands the space you're operating in. And expansion always comes with a period of disorientation. You know what you should do, but some days you can't make yourself do it. And that gap between knowing and doing, that's not weakness. That's where real learning lives. Mindfulness, in the Buddhist sense, is not about having everything figured out. It's about staying present with what actually is, including the confusion, including the not knowing. Buddhism doesn't ask you to resolve all uncertainty before you begin. It asks you to take the next step while the path is still unclear. The path becomes visible as you walk, not before. So if you're confused right now, that's not a stop sign. It's the beginning of honest movement. And honest movement is the only kind that actually takes you somewhere. You've spent enough time pretending things were clearer than they were. That pretending was exhausting. This confusion, as uncomfortable as it is a form of honesty. And honesty is always the better starting point. There's something nobody tells you about the middle of growth. Your mind keeps going back to an older version of you. You compare how you feel now to how you used to feel. You used to feel more certain, more settled, more like you knew who you were. And now, mid-transition, you look back at that old version and feel like you've lost something, like you were more together then, more at peace, more functional. But here's what that memory leaves out. The old version wasn't more evolved. It was more comfortable. Those are not the same thing. Comfort can look like peace when you're inside it, but it can also be a kind of stillness that comes from not moving, not growing, not asking harder questions. The Buddha said, in the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of the things not meant for you. Growth is, at its core, a practice of letting go. And letting go always feels like loss before it feels like freedom. You are not falling behind your old self. You are moving past what that version of you could carry. That old version did the best it could with what it had. But what you have now is different. Your mind sees more now, more honest, more willingness to sit with difficulty. That's not a regression. That's an expansion. The discomfort you feel when you compare old and new is just the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. Gaps feel uncomfortable. That's normal. Gaps are supposed to feel like something, but don't mistake the gap for failure. It's actually the evidence of movement. Think about someone learning to run. The day they run their first mile, they feel proud. But 2 months later, training for 5 miles, that first mile feels slow. Their new standard makes their old achievement feel small. That's not a sign they've gotten worse. It's a sign they've grown enough to want more. You are that runner. And the frustration you feel at your current pace is not discouragement. It's your expanded capacity recognizing it's capable of more. Trust that. Let the old version be what it was, and let this version find what it's reaching toward. Here's what's easy to forget when you're in the middle of this. The old version of you was not a failure. It was the foundation. Every uncomfortable truth you're facing now, you couldn't have faced then. You weren't ready. You are ready now. Not because you're stronger than you were, but because you've built on what came before. Growth doesn't discard the past. It stands on it. Here's something nobody warns you about before you start growing. Your relationships change. Not because you become better than the people around you, but because you start to see things differently. Conversations that used to feel satisfying start to feel hollow. Friendships that used to feel easy start to require more effort. You notice things you didn't notice before. You care about things you used to ignore. And sometimes the people closest to you don't follow you into that new understanding. That's one of the most isolating parts of genuine change. You're in a room with the same people, but something has shifted, and you can feel it. And some days you can't explain it, and some days you wonder if something's wrong with you for noticing. Buddhism doesn't sugarcoat this. The Buddha described the path of awakening as walking alone into the forest. Not because community doesn't matter, but because real inner work is ultimately something no one else can do for you. The loneliness that comes with growth is not a sign you're on the wrong path. It's a sign you've gone further than the part of you that needed constant validation. That's a hard sentence to sit with. Take a moment with it. You used to need certain things from people around you. Approval, agreement, familiar patterns. And as you grow, the need for those things loosens. That loosening can feel like distance, even between you and people you love. That doesn't mean you leave everyone behind. It doesn't mean growth requires isolation. It means you're learning to hold the distance without letting it become estrangement. It means you're learning to stay present with people, even when you're no longer in exactly the same place they are. There's a kind of maturity in that, in being able to love someone across a gap, in staying in the relationship even when the conversation doesn't fully reach you anymore. Something is shifting in how you understand this. The loneliness is not emptiness, it's space. And space is where newer, more honest connection eventually finds room to grow. You won't always be this lonely in your growth, but right now, the loneliness is pointing at something real. It's pointing at how much you've moved and how much you're still willing to keep moving. That's worth something. And over time, you'll find that the people who are right for this version of you do start to appear. Not necessarily the same people, sometimes new ones. People who are also in the middle of something real. People who aren't performing certainty they don't have. People who are honest about the gap between who they are and who they're becoming. Those connections, when they come, feel different, lighter, more real, worth the wait. Growth is not just gain, it's also loss. And you don't give yourself enough permission to grieve that. When you outgrow a way of being, a belief you held for years, a version of yourself, a relationship, a habit that used to comfort you, there is a real ending there. Even if that ending is necessary, even if it's ultimately good for you, it's still a goodbye. And goodbyes carry weight. Buddhism recognizes this in the teaching of impermanence. Anicca Everything that arises also passes. Not just pain, also comfort, also familiarity, also who you used to be. And when something you were attached to passes, grief is the natural response, not weakness, not a failure to stay positive. The natural response. You don't have to rush through that grief. You don't have to reframe it into something hopeful before you're ready. You're allowed to sit with it, acknowledge it, let it move through you at the pace it needs. Here's what happens when you skip grief. You carry it forward without realizing it. It shows up later as resistance, as mental exhaustion without an obvious cause, as the feeling that something is stuck, even when you can't point to what. But when you let yourself grieve what you're leaving behind, something clears, not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly. You stop holding on to something that's already gone, and that releases energy you didn't know you were spending. There's a kind of relief in honest grief, in saying that was real, that mattered, and I'm leaving it behind. Not because it was bad, not because I was wrong to have it, but because I've grown past it. The Buddha walked away from his palace, from comfort, from security, from everything familiar. Not because those things were evil, but because something in him had outgrown what they could give him. And tradition doesn't suggest that departure was easy, only that it was necessary. Yours doesn't have to be easy either. It just has to be honest. Let yourself grieve the version of you that's changing, and then let the new version continue to arrive at the only pace it knows. Grief and growth are not opposites. They move together. You don't have to choose between being sad about what you're leaving and being open to what's coming. Both can be true at the same time. Buddhism calls this the middle way. Not forcing yourself into positivity, not collapsing into the loss, but holding both gently as you continue to walk. You've been sold a version of growth that's dramatic, a moment, a breakthrough, a realization that changes everything overnight. And when you don't get that, when your growth feels slow and quiet and almost invisible, you start to wonder if anything is actually happening. But real growth is usually quiet, understated, almost invisible while it's happening. You don't notice the moment you start reacting differently. You don't see the exact point where something stops triggering you the way it used to. You only realize later, looking back, that something changed. You handled that differently. You didn't spiral this time. You let it go faster. You only see the shift in retrospect. This is what the Buddhist tradition calls gradual cultivation. The idea that wisdom doesn't arrive in a single flash. It accumulates through repeated practice, through sustained attention, through choosing again and again to respond instead of react. The Buddha described it like this: a pot fills with water, one drop at a time. Each drop seems insignificant, but the pot fills. It always fills. Your growth is filling the pot, even on the days it doesn't feel like it. Even on the days you feel like you've made no progress at all. You are accumulating. Every time you choose honesty over comfort. Every time you sit with discomfort instead of numbing it. Every time you offer yourself compassion for being a work in progress. The drops are adding up. Something is already different in how you're holding this now. Maybe you can't fully name it yet. Maybe it's subtle, but something has shifted. And that shift didn't happen today. It happened across all the days you kept showing up. You can't always see the momentum while you're inside it, but it's there. Don't measure your growth by how dramatic it feels. Measure it by how consistently you keep choosing to try. That consistency is what Buddhism calls right effort. Not maximum effort, not exhausting effort. Steady effort, the kind that can be maintained. The kind that doesn't burn out and leave you back at the beginning. You've been putting in that effort, even when you didn't feel it, even when it didn't seem like enough. It's been enough. Drop by drop, it's been enough. Consider this. The most significant changes in your life have probably not felt significant while they were happening. The moment you stopped needing someone's approval. The morning you woke up and the old resentment had quietly faded. The day you realized you'd gone 3 weeks without that habit. You didn't feel those shifts in real time. You noticed them later, looking back, recognizing that something had changed while you weren't watching. That's how growth actually moves. Not in the moments you're watching for it, in all the other moments. In the quiet accumulation of ordinary days. This is the part most content skips, because it's not comfortable to say. Growth doesn't feel good while it's happening, at least not most of the time. It feels like sitting with something difficult, when every instinct says to look away, like choosing the honest conversation instead of the easy one, like releasing the habit that soothes you, because you know it's keeping you small, like showing up even when you don't feel ready. And here's what makes that hard. Your mind is wired to move away from discomfort. That's not a flaw, that's how you were built. It kept your nervous system regulated. It kept you safe. But personal growth asks you to walk toward the things your nervous system calls hard. The uncomfortable conversation, the unfamiliar choice, the willingness to be changed by experience. And that's genuinely difficult. Not because you're not trying hard enough, but because you're human. The Buddha taught what he called right effort, not maximum effort. Not brutal, exhausting effort. Right effort. The kind that is steady, consistent, sustainable over time. Not a sprint that burns you out and leaves you back where you started. A long, deliberate walk. One you can keep taking day after day. You don't have to get it perfect. You don't have to never fall back into old patterns. You just have to keep returning. Each time you return, you're not starting over. You're continuing. There's a difference. The discomfort you feel is not a sign you're on the wrong path. It is the path, not a detour, not a delay. The actual path, and you've already been walking it. Maybe without realizing that's what it was. You've been doing something harder than most people give you credit for. You've been willing to feel the friction of your own becoming. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding this friction, staying comfortable, staying familiar, choosing the path that doesn't ask anything new of them, and wondering quietly why nothing ever really changes. You're not doing that. You're in the friction. You're feeling it. You're still here, and you can feel it. The grip of something old is already loosening. Not completely, not all at once, but loosening. And that is exactly what real growth feels like. Nobody told you growth would feel like this. Like confusion before clarity. Like grief before relief. Like loneliness before connection. Like falling apart before becoming more whole. But Buddhism has been saying it for thousands of years. Not to make the path harder, but to make it recognizable, so that when it's hard, you don't mistake the hardness for a wrong turn. You're not falling apart. You're in the middle of something real. Something that doesn't have a clean timeline or a dramatic finish line. But the fact that you're still here, still asking, still willing to look honestly at what's happening inside you, that's not nothing. That's everything. Growth doesn't stop when it gets hard. Growth is the hard, and you're already doing it. One more thing before you go. Be patient with yourself today. Not the performance of patience, where you tell yourself you're fine when you're not. Real patience, the kind that says, this is hard, and I'm still moving, and that's enough. That's the Buddhist practice in its most ordinary form. Not a mountaintop, not a monastery, just a person being honest, choosing to take the next step. That's you, right now. That's exactly what this is. If this gave you something to hold on to, consider subscribing. There's more content like this here, and it comes out regularly. We're looking at the real questions, not the easy answers. And it might be exactly what you need when you need it.